Alright, so we're almost done for today, so let's get going. So this time we're going to react to Top 50 Best PS2 Games of All Times by Mojo Play. Now, in case you didn't know, I always love playing one of the old schools, man. And I'm so glad, man. I've had so much experience playing PS2 when I was a kid, man. Especially for GTA San Andreas, Sly Cooper. There's a lot of things I remember playing it when I was a kid, cause those are good old times. You know, I'm so glad I play PS2 with me and my brother. We always have a good experience of it. If only wish I could bring back the PS2 and all the other classic games that I ever care about, like GameCube's, original Xbox, Wii, Nintendo 64, and all the other stuff that I want to do, because I'll be gladly love to play and create the game room just in case. So, yeah. Well, let me know, comment down below. What is your favorite PS2 games? Because there's a lot of reasons on the list, so... yeah, but let's check it out in 5, 4, 3, 2. Oh, Burnout 3. I remember this. It's on demo, of course.
Welcome to Mojo Plays, and today we're attempting to narrow down the PS2's massive library to the 50 best games on one of the best consoles of all time.
Looks like Jack still got the mojo.
Oh, yeah.
Before we continue, be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. NBA Street Volume 2.
I remember that. I remember playing NBA Street Volume 2. You know, at my
While there will always be an audience for the realistic yearly release sports titles, those who preferred the game with fewer rules and a lot more fun had the Street series to look forward to. Shrinking the typical basketball roster to a simpler 3-on-3, players could build a team using real-world players of the time, or create their own future b-ball superstar and take to the court to perform the flashiest moves possible and build their combos while also leading the scoreboard. Street Volume 2 included a myriad of different modes, as well as numerous unlockable playable legends, such as Larry Bird to add to your roster and take to the court. With authentic street sounds and a much more realized combo system, as well as a banging soundtrack, the Street series was the best sports game for non-sports fans and a franchise we truly wish had continued. Guilty Gear X2. Although the Guilty Gear series might not have the mainstream recognition of other franchises such as Street Fighter, the Guilty Gear series has developed a cult following of players with its outstanding art direction and some of the tightest fighting mechanics in the genre. Guilty Gear X2 maintained the pitch-perfect gameplay of its arcade cousin, while also introducing the burst gauge, which can be used to unleash an ultimate devastating attack that could easily change the tide of battle. X2 also added new characters to the game's surprisingly deep storyline, which depending on the player's actions could result in one of 60 possible endings. With a wealth of upgrades including a number of new game modes, unlockables, some of the best character designs in the genre, and pick-up and play-style fighting mechanics, Guilty Gear X2 remains one of the best fighters on the PS2 in a series that deserves far more recognition. Ace Combat 4 Shattered Skies.
Bandits in gun range. Shack on the target. Bandit down.
I feel the need for speed. The Ace Combat series always straddled the line between realistic sim and arcade action, but Shattered Skies managed to ride the line between the two perfectly. The beautiful skies and jets created a real sense of speed and tension to each dogfight, and led many to live out their Top Gun dreams of becoming an ace pilot protecting the not-so-friendly skies. The game's surprisingly engaging and oftentimes dramatic storyline is well written enough to pull at the heartstrings of even the most hardened fighter pilot. With no shortage of unlockable aircraft and some of the tightest and, for the time, most realistic flying action on the market, Shattered Skies was not only a return to form, but remains the most well-received entry in the entire franchise even 2 decades later.
I wondered if the fateful enemy ace, the one that Yellow 13 longed to meet, is on. What would happen if they ever came face to face?
Hot Shots Golf 3.
Come on, get the bird. The bird's in her nest. Whoa!
Golf games are some of the oldest sports games in the industry, and while other developers like EA were looking to replicate the sport as realistically as possible, Sony and developer Clap Hands took a different approach and went as loud and lighthearted as they could. Hot Shots Golf 3, or Everybody's Golf if you want to get international about it, was specifically designed to be more accessible than the competition, and its simple approach to gameplay also made it arguably more fun and significantly less punishing. However, don't let the game's cartoony aesthetic fool you. It can be deceptively deep for those looking for a more authentic golf experience, even if the game isn't as concerned with physics as Tiger Woods.
Good save.
Yeah!
Bully.
I've got a good feeling about you,
I
boy.
forgot about
A
that
feeling
game.
you and I are going to be great friends. You keep that nose clean, boy, or I shall clean it myself.
Most gamers use video games
game
as an
has so much
escape from the
experience
real
with
world,
it.
whether that be work or school. But Rockstar managed to make going to school fun again. While attending Bulworth Academy, you'll still be expected to attend classes and complete your assignments, but it's the moments in between where the game truly shines. Jimmy has access to any number of ways to explore the grounds of the academy, as well as the nearby
I'ma play
town,
that. I'ma
and
play
rising
that.
through the ranks of the numerous cliques and groups through increasingly outlandish pranks and activities bring the world to life just as much as its over-the-top characters. Bully managed to not only be fun and engaging throughout, even while you attended the mandatory classes, but also laid the groundwork for Rockstar's future games by creating one of their first truly living, breathing worlds players could fully immerse themselves in.
Hey man, now you're kind of creeping me out. Why does everyone say that to me?
SOCOM 2, U.S. Navy SEALs.
Commander, you must locate the
I forgot
informant,
about that.
call sign Mallard. The information he can provide is essential to the operation.
The early 2000s were the proving ground for online shooters, and while Xbox had Halo, PlayStation had SOCOM. Building upon its solid first entry, SOCOM 2 maintained the same tactical gameplay that made the original such a
Can they bring
hit,
it back?
while improving on and tightening all of the
PS5,
best
I hope.
elements of the series. During the campaign,
so.
players are graded on how well they use their tactical advantages, which in turn can make later missions easier, and commands to other players or the game's AI could even be issued using the included USB headset for additional realism. Multiplayer was a huge element in the SOCOM series' success and offered numerous modes for players to put their tactical planning and coordination to the test, and numerous updates were made to existing maps that carried over to SOCOM 2 to make each arena feel fresh and unexpected.
Copy that. Objective completed.
We were able to take them out silently.
Beautiful Joe.
Head to the Coco, baby!
Go. I think I know this.
2D side-scrollers are one
I
of the most
played 'em
popular
on,
genres in
Marvel
all
vs.
of gaming,
Capcom
but
3, I
Clover Studio
remember.
managed to make theirs stand out in a big way. Players take control of Joe, who gets transported into Movie Land and must rescue his girlfriend by becoming the superhero Beautiful Joe, and his newfound abilities to speed up and slow down gameplay, both of which are advantageous against specific enemies, as well as the power to zoom in, which unlocks new and more powerful
forgot
attacks,
about
with the
that.
caveat that the damage
That's
Joe
fun.
receives is increased as well. These powers added a greater level of strategy than a traditional side-scrolling beat-em-up, and the fact that the game was downright gorgeous made this title even more of a standout than Joe's new power set already did.
There always has to be a plot twist. That means that things always go wrong once before you get to the happy ending. Isn't that right, Joe?
That's my girl.
Rayman 2 Revolution.
Ah, Rayman.
I can feel its energy building up in me.
I play on the
My fist is back to full strength.
Nintendo 64.
Now Nowadays, remakes and remasters are commonplace.
And,
back on the PS2, they were unheard of. Rayman 2 Revolution is a remake of the sequel to Rayman's original 3D outing on the PS1, and was remade as a launch title for the PS2, but also including new areas to explore and challenging new bosses for the limbless hero to contend with. Revolution also opened up the world much more than its original incarnation, allowing players to more freely explore the environments, and also added new powers, cutscenes, and dialogue to help further flesh out one of Rayman's last great 3D adventures before being overshadowed by those damn rabbits.
Yahoo! Follow me, my friend.
Splinter Cell Chaos Theory.
Nice night.
Splinter Cell introduced players to one of the most realistic stealth experiences possible at the time with Sam Fisher and his hallway splits. Chaos Theory took the foundation of the first game and took things even further. Besides the standard light detection meter, players also had to be concerned with how much noise they were making as they crouch walked around, but could make use of ambient noise to mask their own approach and takedowns. Players were also given more freedom in how they approach each mission, with each giving them one of 3 kit options to take with them. Enemies would also now do sweeps of the area searching for bodies that could trigger alarms, eventually leading to a mission failure should you have gotten careless. Sam Fisher and Splinter Cell represent some of the best the stealth genre has to offer, but there once was another.
I've heard they don't make them like me anymore. There was this other guy, though, Army Infiltration. He wore a bandana or something.
I heard he finally retired.
Really?
Yep.
It's only me.
HalfLife.
I forgot.
Half-Life is undoubtedly one of the most important and influential shooters of all time, with its influence still being felt in the first-person shooter genre even today. The story of Gordon Freeman and the Black Mesa facility dealing with the fallout of an interdimensional incident and the iconic G-Man remains one of the highest-rated games of all time. While Half-Life has been ported almost as many times as Skyrim, until the recent Black Mesa, the PS2 version was the definitive version of the beloved game, featuring not only updated and smoother graphics, but also tweaks and improvements to level design. If you hadn't had the chance to play Half-Life during its initial release on PC, those on the home console actually had the chance to play the best version there was.
Time to choose. Wisely done, Mr. Freeman.
We love Katamari. The Katamari Damacy series is one of the strangest to find such an enormous audience and passionate fanbase. The idea of controlling a tiny prince who must collect random junk to rebuild the cosmos of stars is such a bizarre concept it could have only been conceived during the creative renaissance of the PS2. We Love Katamari built on the premise of its predecessor, quite literally, by increasing the scale of the entire game. Nothing was off limits in terms of what could be collected. Buildings, mountains, even the clouds in the sky were up for grabs, and certain parts of the environments were locked off until your ball of cosmos energy was the appropriate size. Players could also eventually unlock new wardrobe options for the prince, and even engage in a chaotic 2-player mode in which both players must work together to control their Katamari. Psychonauts.
My name
starts with a D.
Is Rasputin.
Double Fine and Tim Schafer have a long and storied history of creating wildly fantastical worlds for players to explore, and Psychonauts is by far their most mind-bending. Stepping into the adolescent shoes of a would-be psychodet, Raz explores the training campgrounds of potential applicants and does basically whatever it takes to get inside their heads. Literally. By diving into the other characters' minds, the game is able to create some of the most varied and outlandish worlds players are ever likely to visit, and with Raz's psychic abilities, he's not without the means to defend himself against any horrors he might encounter within their psyche. Despite the game's admittedly cartoon aesthetic, it has a surprisingly mature storyline, that manages to weave complicated issues into the game's narrative through the pursuit of emotional baggage that many of the characters suffer from.
I mean, what do I have to do to get those guys to take me seriously?
When are you going to shut up and kiss me?
I can hear that.
I know.
Rumble Racing. There was no shortage of outstanding arcade racers on the PS2. But while most were focused on designing the perfect track or making their vehicles look as realistic as possible, Rumble Racing took more inspiration from Mario Kart and focused on the simple fun of racing. Zipping around tracks laden with hidden shortcuts, players also needed to focus on pulling off the best stunts for the biggest boosts and avoiding all the outrageous power-ups the other drivers were throwing at them, all while working towards unlocking increasingly ridiculous vehicles. Turning racing into an extreme sports title added a new layer to the typical driving of the racing genre, and the hilarious announcer kept things entertaining whether you caught huge air or messed up a turn and ended up at the back of the pack. Onimusha 3, Demon Siege.
Onimusha 3? Don't remember.
Born from an idea of a ninja version of Resident Evil, the Onimusha series developed its own following and separated itself from Capcom's iconic series with its impressive enemy and boss design and more strategic approach to combat. With Onimusha 3, Capcom changed the time period by sending fan favorite Samanosuke to the future, and newcomer Jacques Blanc, played by Jean Reno, to feudal Japan and introduced new weapons and tactics for players to combat the demon hordes. Even with the fixed camera angles, the game was gorgeous, making great use of its 3D environment and featured some stunning CGI that still holds up today. Demon Siege remains the peak for a series that has been dormant for far too long, and fans have been clamoring for a remake or reboot of the series for literal decades.
I owe you one. Yeah. It was a blast.
Beyond Good and Evil.
Oh, Beyond Good and Evil. I heard they actually make it.
The PS2 was a wonderfully experimental time for developers, and Beyond Good and Evil blends several genres such as stealth, action, platformer, and investigation, all set against the backdrop of government cover-ups and alien conspiracies. The world of Beyond Good and Evil was filled with vibrant colors and memorable characters, many of whom accompany Jade on her missions, and the game's level design allowed players to approach some scenarios either stealthily or using Jade's myriad of unlockable combat moves and gadgets. Beyond Good and Evil remains one of the PS2's best action-adventure titles in which all of its various components worked perfectly together, and the game still holds up remarkably well even today. While the game wasn't an immediate commercial success, the blending of genres and iconic protagonist Jade eventually found its audience, and has since become a cult classic in every definition of the term.
Who do you think you are? Did you think you'd actually be able to make a difference?
Midnight Club 3 Dub Edition Remix.
I played that. Midnight Club 3.
Believe it or not, there was once a time when we used to get more than one or two games a decade from Rockstar, and oftentimes, those games even got sequels. Shocking, I know. Arguably, one of their best was the Midnight Club series, which gave players an open world to challenge opponents and the kind of arcadey, over-the-top racing that was popularized during the PS2 generation. The Dub Edition remix added so much additional content it could have been a sequel on its own. New maps, new vehicles, new customization options, new music tracks, and even the return of the classic Tokyo map from Midnight Club 2.
And
all of this could be played online against brand new opponents all over the world just to remix things up a bit when you were done crushing the AI. Amplitude. Harmonix are the masters of rhythm-based video games, and long before they convinced everyone they were rock stars with little plastic guitars, the studio was perfecting their formula with titles like Amplitude. A sequel to their equally entertaining game Frequency, players need to guide their beat ship along a series of tracks, each belonging to a different instrument, and hit the notes in time with the beat. Just like in Guitar Hero, the more notes you hit correctly, the better combos and bonuses, while missing notes can eventually end your run. The ultimate chill game, Amplitude featured a surprising number of real-world music tracks for players to groove to, no matter your taste in music. Players could also go head-to-head with other players either in person or online, and even a remix mode in which the player could recreate their own version of the game's tracks by adding their own notes to the songs. Kingdom Hearts 2.
Kingdom Hearts 2.
Looks like my summer vacation is over.
The original Kingdom Hearts was a concept that shouldn't have worked as well as it did. Combining elements of Final Fantasy games with beloved Disney properties sounds like a fever dream, but ended up being the start of a franchise with a legion of fans still trying to decipher its overarching plot today. Kingdom Hearts 2 streamlined everything fans loved about the first game and improved upon it. Combat was faster, the story was much easier to follow, there was more diversity in the worlds you visited, Donald was useful, and the much maligned gummy ship sections were actually fun. Square Enix even tapped into the coveted Disney Vault and allowed players to explore the worlds of Steamboat Willie and Tron. Kingdom Hearts 2 improved on nearly every aspect and remains many fans' favorite entry in this increasingly convoluted series.
Sora, Donald, Goofy, you guys are too much. If you're ever in the mood for some more cosmic razzle-dazzle, give me a shout, okay?
DOA 2 Hardcore.
K.O. You lose.
These days, the Dead or Alive series is more well known for its endless cosmetic microtransactions than its fighting systems, but back on the PS2, DOA 2 Hardcore was the best the series had to offer. In the earliest days of the PS2, DOA 2 showed what the console was capable of with beautiful environments and characters, interactive arenas, stunning cutscenes, and arcade-quality gameplay. The PS2 version was the most feature-rich edition of the game, with additional fighting arenas, costumes, all new playable characters, and animations were smoothed and refined while gameplay speed was increased to 60 FPS all the way back in the PS2's infancy. DOA 2 Hardcore set a high benchmark for later fighting games that would eventually come to surpass the superb PS2 launch title, and remains one of the most rewarding and entertaining fighting games of the PS2 over 2 decades later. Klonoa 2 Lunity's Veil. Sometimes a game doesn't need to do anything revolutionary to be a simple, fun, and engaging experience. Instead of simply guiding Klonoa around 2D environments, he can use the 3D space to interact with objects and enemies in the foreground and background, which adds an additional layer, literally, to exploration and puzzle solving. In addition to the game being stunningly gorgeous, the game's narrative connecting all the levels was surprisingly engaging and deeper than it initially seemed, featuring a number of surprising twists and turns. Unfortunately, the game wasn't an immediate commercial success despite good word of mouth and glowing reviews. It did, however, earn a remaster of Klonoa 2 and its predecessor Door to Phantom Mile for modern consoles, allowing an entire new generation to experience the beauty of this genre-defining platformer. Time Splitters 2.
For they have taken their evil war into our past. Traveling through time, they have sown corruption, unraveling the fabric of our history.
The original Time Splitters was a launch title for the PS2 and was a wonderful proof of concept with its inventive character designs and time-hopping objectives, but Time Splitters 2 was where the series truly found its footing. Featuring a much more fleshed out and detailed storyline, as well as more levels to explore, and each taking place in a new time period, the sequel improved on its predecessor in every way imaginable. One of the standout multiplayer experiences on consoles, thanks in large part to a majority of the dev team having also worked on GoldenEye 007, Time Splitters 2 hit a bar that even its follow-up Future Perfect couldn't match. The series maintains a loyal fan base, and with rumors of the series making a comeback, there's no better time to be a loyal Time Splitters fan.
Time to get out of here.
Tekken 5. The Tekken series has been and
still
still remains a PlayStation staple and is synonymous with Sony's console, even if in recent years the series has gone multi-platform. After some divisive choices in Tekken 4, the 5th entry brought things back to basics and fine-tuned everything until all the mechanics worked harmoniously. Every character has their own storyline for players to progress through, cosmetics to customize your favorite fighter, as well as the return of the fan-favorite juggle system, and fans could even play as Devil Jin for the first time in the well-meaning but poorly realized Devil Within minigame. Tekken 5 was the complete package for fans looking for the perfect arcade port, and a welcome entry point for newcomers of the franchise, even if it did require a bit of homework to catch up on the series' surprisingly deep lore and backstory.
You win.
Red Faction.
Mars. I always thought of it as a romantic place, a planet of mystery and adventure.
How is it with all the advancements in video game engines over the years, we've actually ended up with less destructible environments? In the early days of the PS2, destructible environments and terrain were barely a consideration due to hardware limitations, but the team at Volition and their Geomod engine proved it was not only possible, but it was a hell of a good time too. The ability to take out bridges, walls, and quite literally tunnel in any direction if you had enough explosives was revolutionary for the time, and is still a marvel even 2 decades later. Despite the Total Recall-esque plot tying everything together, the series proved popular enough to span a series of sequels, but sadly the Geomod technology was never utilized outside of the Red Faction series, and there hasn't been a proper entry in the franchise since 2011.
What are you gonna do?
Who knows? I won't be staying on Mars, that's for sure.
Baldur's Gate: Dark Alliance. Dungeons & Dragons has had no shortage of video game adaptations over the years, and out of all of them, the Baldur's Gate series is the one most highly regarded and synonymous with the tabletop RPG. Foregoing the turn-based combat of many other adaptations, Dark Alliance uses its hack-and-slash combat to keep players constantly engaged in battle, running the many calculations and dice rolls off-screen so players never need to worry about anything beyond the many creatures right in front of them. The addition of couch co-op gave fans of Diablo a console-friendly version of the dungeon-crawling RPG, and its straightforward approach to the often complicated tabletop game brought in many new fans who would have never known it was something everyone could enjoy. Dark Cloud 2.
This was the beginning of a real adventure.
Level 5's follow-up to their first ever game managed to not only build on everything that made the first title great, but also expand on the mechanics and create an all-encompassing RPG that still puts many modern RPGs to shame with its breadth of content. Tasked with rebuilding the world, players must battle through randomly generated dungeons to collect geostones and rebuild the destroyed villages while also contending with the many requests of the rescued villagers for a better version of their hometowns. Along with a new art style also came the implementation of time travel that allowed players to travel to the future to see the fruits of their efforts that makes the many battles they faced in their quests all the more rewarding. It's a shame the series hasn't continued, as we'd love to see how Level 5 could have improved on the series even further.
The outside world. Right then, my heart was filled with expectation, wondering what kind of places I would find.
Jak 2.
Hang on, everyone!
Naughty Dog's Jak and Daxter was one of the first titles to truly show the power of the PS2 with its incredible draw distance and seamless interconnected world open for the player to explore. For the sequel, Naughty Dog took inspiration from the GTA series and not only adopted a darker tone, but also allowed Jak to jack vehicles to navigate Haven City. Jak still had his usual melee attacks, but now also had access to an arsenal of weapons as well as a beast mode Dark Jak that has increased attack power and even a gun specific to this form. Thankfully, it wasn't all doom and gloom, as Daxter remains the peak of comic relief throughout the adventure. Jak 2's more mature story introduced a more dynamic world and characters that marked a stark departure for Naughty Dog, and all the drastic changes that could have easily backfired ended up working in their favor.
This place has too much excitement. We need to move back to the country.
Devil May Cry 3, Dante's Awakening.
One of the best games.
I can already tell. Looks like this is gonna be one hell of a party!
The Devil May Cry series epitomizes everything the action video game genre is about. Silky smooth combat, classic one-liners, an overconfident and overpowered protagonist, and larger-than-life encounters with equally over-the-top boss fights. The original Devil May Cry game birthed an entirely new genre of action spectacle, and Dante's Awakening was undoubtedly not only one of Dante's best outings, but also one of the best action games for adrenaline junkies on the PS2. The weapons were more diverse, and the action was somehow even more over the top and in your face than thought possible, and the younger and cockier Dante was just what the series needed after the Demon Hunter's disappointing second outing. There's a reason the Devil May Cry series is so lauded by action fans, and Dante's Awakening reawakened the series into the action juggernaut it is even today.
I love this. This is what I live for! I'm absolutely crazy about it!
Medal of Honor Frontline.
I gotta play Devil May Cry 3. Medal of Honor.
The Medal of Honor series might be no more nowadays, but back on the PS1 and PS2, the series was the pinnacle of World War II first-person combat. And while both systems saw numerous releases over the years, the benchmark of the series was undoubtedly its first entry on the PS2, Medal of Honor Frontline. While it didn't make huge changes to its tried and true formula established by previous entries, Frontline nailed every aspect of its combat, objectives-based gameplay, and atmosphere better than any other entry. Storming the opening Normandy level remains an exhilaratingly haunting experience even today, and while many subsequent entries attempted to match this level of immersion, none managed to even come close. Call of Duty might be the reigning champ of first-person shooters these days, but for a time, Medal of Honor represented the best of what console shooters had to offer.
I couldn't have expected half the results you achieved. So, take some much-needed R&R, but rest assured we'll be calling on you soon.
Dragon Quest VIII, Journey of the Cursed
Dragon
King.
Quest?
So this is what all the fuss was about.
As the inspiration for the arguably more popular Final Fantasy series, Dragon Quest still has a rabid fan base that eagerly awaits any news of future projects in the franchise. The first fully 3D entry, Dragon Quest VIII doesn't stray too far from the familiar RPG format that made it a mainstay in the industry, and it doesn't need to since it created the template to begin with. Everything from its beautiful art style, courtesy of Akira Toriyama, to the compelling story and wonderfully symphonic music, everything comes together perfectly to create one of the best entries in the franchise that birthed the RPG genre and remains one of the best-selling and well-received RPGs on the PlayStation 2, hands down.
When you all set off so bravely, we decided it was time we did the same. So, perhaps you could fill us in.
Tony Hawk's Underground.
And yo, Merry Christmas.
Thanks!
Tony Hawk was the face of extreme sports throughout the late 90s and the early 2000s, and is probably responsible for more hospital visits from would-be skateboarders than can be properly recorded. For the series' fifth entry, Neversoft gave players more freedom to customize their experience than ever before, allowing them to custom create their skater, even face skating themselves into the game, their style, and their board as they kickflip their way through the series' first, and surprisingly engaging story mode campaign. Players could get off their board and run, climb, and explore the environments, even if this feature wasn't as fine-tuned as the skating itself. Players would cross paths with skateboarding legends as they rose to the top and eventually take down their backstabbing former best friend, Eric Sparrow, the bastard. The Underground series remains the benchmark for a series in dire need of a major comeback.
Winner takes the tape.
Damn! Virtua Fighter 4 Evolution.
Of course.
I don't make allowances for old man.
With all the over-the-top fighting games on the PS2, Those looking for a more realistic brawler didn't have to look much further than Sega's Virtua Fighter series, and arguably the best game in the entire series was their fourth entry on the PS2. Although the series isn't as instantly recognizable or as massive a hit as its contemporaries, those who loved the Virtua Fighter series found the best possible version of the fighter in the PS2 version Evolution, with pitch-perfect combat and precise controls, countless unlockables, incredibly detailed characters and environments, as well as brand new modes to keep fans engaged for countless hours. PS2 owners also received the 10th anniversary, which featured a remake of the original Virtua Fighter for those with a nostalgic itch. Eco. Team Eco and Japan Studio came out swinging with their first game, and it was instantly a hit with critics and quickly achieved cult status. While the sequel Shadow of the Colossus was undoubtedly more of a commercial success, Eco still holds a special place in the hearts of many gamers. Following the titular character Eco as he is locked away in a castle after being shunned by his village for his horns, he soon meets another captive in the castle, a young girl named Yorda, and the two set about finding a means of escape by solving a myriad of puzzles and fighting off shadows determined to recapture Yorda once again.
Jump!
Guitar Hero 2. If there was ever a phenomenon that swept gaming in the mid-2000s, it was the rhythm music peripheral genre. Years before the Wii dominated households, everyone that owned a console had one of these plastic guitars in the corner of their room just waiting for the next jam session. The success of the first entry led to numerous requests from artists for their music to be in the game, as well as partnerships with real-world guitar designers. New multiplayer and practice modes made Guitar Hero 2 an unexpected go-to party game, and the inclusion of even more and varied tracks not only gave everyone something to play, but also introduced an entire new generation to some older classics. The craze of peripheral music games might have long since had their last encore, but the nostalgia for all those plastic instruments still gives an entire generation the member berries. Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time. The prince had already been around for the better part of a decade before Ubisoft sent him on a quest for the Sands of Time. But it was this adventure on the PS2 that really gave the prince the recognition he deserved. There was no shortage of action-adventure platformers before the Sands of Time, but none had the smooth parkour traversal the prince had. The prince's ability to wall run, slide, roll, and free run past all of the castle's defenses controlled like a dream, and should the player suffer a misstep, the ability to rewind time using the Dagger of Time was a literal game changer. Tied together by a brilliantly realized and acted script that endeared the prince to a wealth of new fans and featured a star-making performance by future Spider-Man Yuri Lowenthal, even the series' sequels couldn't reach the same heights as the prince's journey to rewind the Sands of Time.
Most people think time is like a river that flows swift and sure in one direction. But I have seen the face of time, and I can tell you, they are wrong.
Soul Calibur 2.
Ah, yes. I'm so glad.
There was no shortage of impressive fighting games on the PS2, but few nailed the arcade perfection of Soul Calibur 2 on the PS2. From the gorgeous graphics and character designs to the pitch-perfect gameplay, everything about this fighting game clicked, and the use of weapons instead of fisticuffs made the game much easier for novices who could easily hone their skills with their favorite character. Along with a myriad of different game modes, developer Project Soul also introduced numerous quality-of-life improvements to the game to make it more accessible with easy-to-learn but tough-to-master new gameplay mechanics for people of all skill levels to experience that feeling of just one more round.
You win!
SSX Tricky.
Break a trail for the rest of them.
As one of the PS2's launch titles, SSX stood out with its loud and colorful characters, as well as its solid and fun trick-filled gameplay as players raced their way down the numerous mountain passes. Its sequel got tricky with it and managed to improve on itself in nearly every aspect. The introduction of Uber tricks made gameplay far more arcadey and over-the-top than its predecessor, as well as the inclusion of rivals in which the game's AI would become more aggressive towards the player, depending on how often they knocked them out of the race. While the majority of the game was recycled from the original title only a year earlier, the new additions and improvements to the gameplay made many fans overlook what was essentially an expansion and instead rightfully viewed the game as the definitive SSX experience. Okami. In their short time developing titles, Clover Studio managed to create some of the most original and vibrantly inventive video games in the PS2's catalog, but by far their magnum opus is undeniably Okami. The game's watercolor aesthetic was more than just a creative design choice, as using the celestial brush, players could recreate the world and use it to slash their opponents during combat and boss encounters. Many people rightfully compared the game to Nintendo's Legend of Zelda series, and with the game's sweeping Japanese mythology, interesting characters, and deep mechanics, as well as the creators' affinity for that series, it's not hard to see why. Sadly, the game was not an immediate commercial success, and the series ended after only one game and a spiritual successor, and Clover Studio was shut down shortly after, canceling any plans to continue the series beyond numerous ports on future consoles. Burnout 3 Takedown.
Burnout 3?
Despite there being no shortage of outstanding racing games on the PS2, Burnout 3 Takedown stands head and shoulders above the competition with lightning-fast gameplay, a focus on vehicular combat, and a wealth of additional modes to keep gameplay from growing stale. The Burnout series slowly grew into its own with each entry, but Takedown nailed the formula the series was racing towards from the starting line. With impeccable track design and an addictive crash mode, Burnout 3 won numerous Game of the Year awards, and even the series' subsequent entries could match up to the frenetic gameplay and blazing sense of speed, and even today, Takedown is widely considered not only one of the best racing games on the PS2, but also one of the best video games of all time. Sly 2, Band of Thieves.
Sounds like fun. You and me, back to back?
Totally. Outnumbered, fighting impossible odds. It's perfect.
All right, pal. Let's get to it.
While most 3D platformers are focused on the numerous ways to double jump around in an environment, Sucker Punch took all those same mechanics and made everything a bit stealthier. Building off the pitch-perfect platforming of the original Sly Cooper, players could also take control of his teammates Bentley and Murray, each complete with their own abilities and skill sets to handle each new situation. They're not the only ones with some new tricks up their sleeve either, as now Sly can pickpocket coins or other valuable items from enemies without engaging them directly in combat. The levels themselves were also much more open, allowing players to tackle the numerous objectives in a much less linear fashion than its predecessor, with all the missions being planned out from a central hub that Sly and the crew return to between missions.
Come on, Sly, let's get out of here!
Persona 4.
That's the way. Slow down. Do some more damage. Go, Senpai.
Yes, believe it or not, Persona 4 released on the PS2 almost a full 2 years into the PS3's life cycle. While many experienced the title on Sony's PS Vita, longtime series fans eagerly dusted off their PS2s for what some would argue is the best entry in the franchise. Arguably one of the most stylistic RPGs on the market, Persona 4 just oozes charm with its instantly likable characters living their day-to-day lives, going to class and building friendships, all while investigating a series of murders connected to the TV world. You would think that living out the daily lives of school children would grow tiresome, but the clever writing and numerous twists and turns in the narrative kept players engaged and constantly guessing until the very end. Persona 4 has been re-released numerous times with extra content, and has even seen multiple spin-offs including rhythm and fighting games.
Thank you very much. You're really kind, Sensei. I'll try even harder from now on.
Gran Turismo 3 Aspec. The Gran Turismo series was always the pinnacle of real-life simulation racing ever since its debut on the PS1, but with Gran Turismo 3 Aspec, Polyphony Digital crafted what is considered by some to be their magnum opus of the franchise. While the number of cars was significantly less than in Gran Turismo 2, what was on offer more than made up for the lack of options. With 180 cars, 19 tracks, and numerous high-performance vehicles to choose from, and numerous challenges associated with each, fans of the series had a lot to get their engines going. Gran Turismo 3 also substantially bumped up the detail of each track and vehicle thanks to the increased power of the PS2, making it one of the best looking racers on the console throughout the entirety of the PS2's lifecycle. To date, Gran Turismo 3 remains the highest rated entry in the long-running franchise. Final Fantasy X.
Final Fantasy.
The first entry in the long-running franchise on the PS2, every new Final Fantasy game was an event, but there was something different about Final Fantasy X's release. Thankfully, Final Fantasy X more than met the hype and made some huge leaps for the franchise going forward. The first Final Fantasy title to feature voice acting, as we've said, for better or worse, fully voiced characters added an extra level of depth to their struggles. As opposed to simply reading about their pain and frustrations, now you could hear it. Final Fantasy X was also the first entry to use fully 3D backgrounds, bringing more life to the world as Tidus and his companions openly explored the vast and vibrant landscape. Final Fantasy X marked a turning point for the franchise that every future entry has built upon, but at its core, this is the best and most accessible title for new and old fans alike. Silent Hill 2.
Silent Hill 2.
Could you really be in this?
I had to actually doing a remake, I totally forgot.
Even over 2 decades later, Silent Hill 2 remains the pinnacle of psychological horror. Whereas other horror series were focused on giving the player enough ammo to survive and jump scares, although there is still a good amount of those to be fair, Silent Hill 2 told an extremely mature story about guilt and grief set against the backdrop of a nightmare. The original Silent Hill laid the groundwork, but its sequel perfected the formula. The oppressive fog, once used to mask technical limitations, took on a more oppressive and ominous feeling, filling players with a sense of dread as to what could be hiding in the fog around the next corner. So much of what has made Silent Hill the iconic series it has began here, especially with the introduction of Pyramid Head and its multifaceted and tragic narrative that is still being discussed even today.
I was weak. That's why I needed you. I needed someone to punish me for my sins.
Twisted Metal Black.
He made me an offer. He said he ran some kind of crazy contest. If I won his game, he promised to show me how to bring an end to the curse.
The Twisted Metal series always had a dark sense of humor, but the franchise's first entry on the PS2 removed almost all the humor and focused primarily on the darker side of the twisted characters, and honestly, has endured far longer than its peers because of it. Twisted Metal Black's focus on the over-the-top vehicular carnage was in top form, and the darker tone even extends to the gameplay, as Black is widely considered one of the most difficult entries in the series. Every character's individual storyline was wonderfully twisted and fleshed out, drawing players to experience each campaign to see their backgrounds and what form their eventual wish would take. The variety of weapons also gave players more options than ever to customize their way to play, and a later online version expanded the ways players could express their road rage.
It took me all of 10 seconds. Let's face it, boys and girls. A man has to have his priorities.
Shadow of the Colossus. While both Eco and Shadow of the Colossus are undeniably iconic PS2 classics, Shadow of the Colossus gains the edge due to its brilliant gameplay design and masterful art direction. Shadow of the Colossus took the concept of impressive spectacle boss fights and made it their central mechanic of the entire game. These giants can often be found peacefully minding their own business until the player comes along, and each one presents its own challenge as players need to discover either the quickest way to the top or how to trap said Colossus to finally bring them down.
So you
For
play
a
as
game
a bad
with
guy,
virtually
huh?
no dialogue, it's a testament to the game's spectacular direction that it's also one of the most emotional roller coaster rides on the PS2, and remains one of the landmark titles for the argument that games should be viewed as works of art.
Of course.
Ratchet and Clank, your arsenal.
It's a new sergeant. Huh? Hey, Sarge, you can have my gun. There's too many of them. We're all gonna die.
Much like the rivalry between Mario and Sonic in the 90s, Sony had their own platformer war waging on the PS2 between Jak and Daxter and Ratchet and Clank. And while both were beloved and well received, only one truly came out victorious and still continues even today. Whereas Jak had a bit of an identity crisis during his trilogy, Ratchet always knew he wanted to blow things up in the most outlandish ways imaginable, and Up Your Arsenal is still one of the best outings for the Lombax and his little robot pal. With more varied weapons, locations, and even brand new vehicles to control, Up Your Arsenal lived up to its name and delivered players more content than they knew what to do with, in addition to one of the best stories in the franchise.
Oh, the humiliation! Defeated by squishes! Oh, I'll never live this down!
Metal Gear Solid 3: Snake Eater.
Of course.
From the mastermind creator of the stealth genre itself, Hideo Kojima's third entry into the Metal Gear Solid series was and still is one of his best. While the previous two entries were set in more industrial and modern playgrounds, Snake Eater takes things a bit more primal by dropping Naked Snake into the jungle and forcing him to survive using only what he can find. Stealth played a much more prominent role in Snake Eater than ever before, as players needed to constantly change up their camouflage to blend in with their surroundings. With fewer over-the-top action moments, although there were still plenty, this is Kojima after all, the focus was purely on the stealth aspect this time around, and players could even complete the entire game undetected using the game's mechanics, built specifically allowing them to do so. God of War 2.
Ah, yes.
Gods of Olympus!
I played God of War 2.
Do you need more proof than this?
When Kratos burst onto the gaming scene in 2005 with his Chaos Blades, his quest for revenge and no-nonsense attitude instantly made him an icon as the angriest protagonist in gaming. God of War 2 built upon this initial premise and managed to make Kratos even angrier as his betrayal at the hands of the gods spurred him into initiating their eradication from the Greek pantheon. The weapon selection was more diverse, the action was more visceral, the environments were far more varied and detailed, and the boss fights were some of the biggest in gaming at the time, and the over-the-top nature of these encounters easily made God of War 2 one of the best action games on the PS2.
Zeus, your son has returned! I bring the destruction of Olympus!
Resident Evil 4.
Ah, yes! I'm so glad for Resident Evil 4. The original one.
Just as the original Resident Evil birthed an entirely new genre of gaming, so too did Resident Evil 4 revolutionize not only the RE series itself, but also left a significant mark on the entire industry that is still felt today. The switch from the static camera to the over-the-shoulder perspective was revolutionary and became a staple of every third-person shooter from that moment on. While sidelining much of the series as iconic horror in favor for one-liners and roundhouse kicks, Resident Evil 4 managed to stay true to the basis of its roots, but put the focus squarely on the player having the absolute best time possible while headshotting and suplexing the Las Plagas with a much more confident and able-bodied Leon.
Where's everyone going? Bingo?
Grand Theft Auto Trilogy.
Of course!
We gotta get our stuff and get out of here!
Relax, both of you. Let me think for a second. Tommy Vercetti just doesn't cut and run.
Undeniably the series that changed open-world games
That's
forever,
how I
we
remember
couldn't
it.
choose just one from the trilogy that redefined the open-world formula, so we're including them all in one entry. Each iteration built on the one before it, and the fact that Rockstar managed to develop and release all 3 expansive games within the span of 3 years makes this feat even more impressive when you consider just how much detail went into each entry and how each one was more ambitious than the last. Honestly, you'd be hard-pressed to choose one over the others, from 3's humble beginnings and memorable world to Vice
That's
City's
my first time
atmosphere and
playing
characters,
GTA 3.
and the sheer scale and customization options available in San Andreas. The series has something for everyone. Everything that today's gamers love about the iconic series started here and began the deluge of copycat games trying desperately to chase the formula that Rockstar perfected.
Ooh, everything is different now.
What is it?
Everything. They will call this Year Zero.
Which PS2 games are in your top 50 best? Share your favorites down in the comments. Did you enjoy this video? Check out these other clips for Mojo Plays, and be sure to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified about our latest videos.
Man, I'm so glad they put this best for last, of course. Because I remember playing, my first time I was playing GTA 3, what I got from Christmas. It was at like in 2001, and I gotta say, those are the great old time sakes that I actually played from it, you know, throughout like a lot of things. And I haven't played more on the PS2 games since then, since I forgot about it. But I'm so glad I have so many memorized it, and I miss one of my old childhood back in the days, man. I ain't gonna lie. But somehow, man, I wish I could collect a lot of classic games for the PS2. I really hope so, man, cause I got so much experience about it. Along with the current new games that might be coming out, I just hope it'll be better. But yeah. But let me know, comment down below, what is your favorite PS2 games? There's a lot of them, of course, and I'll have to put this on my list as well. Well, maybe next time, so I'll talk more about it just in case. So yeah, but yeah, man, let me know what y'all think about it, and yeah, I'll see you on the next video.